Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight, you're in 18th century Canada, where the forests stretch wider than memory, and winter settles in like a weight you can't quite shift. You're not a commander or a frontiersman of legend, just a solitary fur trapper moving through the endless snow. Before we start, do me one small favour. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you'd prefer these stories without ads, you can join the Patreon. It's linked in the description. And if you want the ultimate immersive experience, consider using a pair of wireless earbuds. They're comfortable, discreet and designed so you can wear them even while sleeping. I've linked my favourite pair, plus other sleep tools, in the description. Now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. You start the morning with the kind of stillness that feels less like silence and more like an old presence settling around you, as if the land is taking its first breath long before you take yours. The snow stretches in every direction, pale and endless, blurring the edges of trees and sky into a single, unbroken whiteness. You stand there for a moment, letting your boots sink slowly into the crusted surface, listening to nothing. The kind of nothing that carries its own weight, the kind that presses softly against your ears until you begin to imagine the snow itself is listening. You've been in the northern woods before, but each winter greets you as if you've returned to a place that hardly noticed you left. The cold curls around your face with a familiar indifference, brushing against your skin like a hand that has forgotten warmth. Your breath lifts into the air in slow ghostly ribbons, drifting upward before vanishing into the pale morning light. The trees stand tall and narrow, their branches heavy, with packed frost that clings like old memories. The bark beneath the ice is dark and rough, marked by wind and time. When you touch it, just briefly, it stings your fingers with the kind of cold that feels ancient. You withdraw your hand before the numbness saturates your fingertips, pressing them into the wool of your mittens as if to remind yourself that blood still moves through them. You shift the weight of your pack over your shoulder. The leather straps have stiffened overnight and groan faintly when you pull them tighter. Inside, you carry the tools that keep you alive. Traps, a knife sharpened so often it has grown thin at the edges. A flint, a worn blanket that still smells faintly of smoke. There is no comfort in any of it, but there is familiarity, and here that is often the closest thing you get. Ahead, the world narrows into a path you've walked enough times that your body knows it better than your thoughts. It winds gently between the spruce and birch trees, disappearing into folds of snow and shadow. You follow it without hurry, because nothing in this land rewards haste. The cold punishes quick movements. The snow pulls at your legs when you push too hard. Everything here has learned patience, and if you want to survive, you must learn it too. Your boots crunch softly with each step, a slow rhythmic sound that blends into the muted landscape. The snow is not fresh. It hasn't been fresh in weeks. It has settled into heaviness, pressed down by its own weight, forming layers that seem determined to outlast you. There is a name for this kind of winter, the kind where the thaw never quite comes, where the world feels stuck between breath and stillness. You heard it once from an older trapper, a man whose face seemed carved from the same bark as the trees. The winter that never ends, he called it. At the time, you thought he was exaggerating. Now you understand he was merely tired. The cold finds its way through every seam of your clothing, even through wool, through fur, through layers you once thought generous. It creeps up your sleeves and curls under your collar, settling along your spine with quiet persistence. It makes your muscles move more slowly, your breath grow heavier. Sometimes you wonder if the cold here is less a season and more a personality, something ancient and resigned that has simply chosen not to leave. As you walk, you come across the faint outline of a frozen creek. In summer, it murmurs gently across the stones, but now it lays silent, trapped beneath a layer of ice, thick enough to hold the weight of a moose. You kneel beside it, brushing away the powder of snow until the glassy surface reflects your fingers. Beneath it, shadows drift lazily, trapped in a slow underwater world that seems half alive. You touch the ice lightly. It bites back sharp and aggressive, as if warning you not to linger. You rise again and continue, adjusting the scarf around your face. The fabric is stiff with frost, clinging to your breath like a crust of salt. You pull it tighter. The air here steals warmth before you even realize it's gone. There is no sun yet, only a faint hint of light diffused across the sky, a suggestion rather than a promise. Daybreak in these woods feels more like a slow easing into visibility than the arrival of morning. The light does not expand so much as seep through the clouds, pale and unhurried, revealing the edges of the world 1 inch at a time. By midday, the cold sharpens. It becomes a more insistent companion, pressing against your cheeks with a steady, unforgiving patience. You stop beside a stand of pines to drink from your water skin, only to find the liquid inside sluggish, nearly frozen. You coax a small sip through clenched teeth, tasting metal and cold leather. You take a moment to steady yourself, leaning against a tree whose trunk is coated in frost. The forest is still. No birds, no rustling branches. The stillness is so deep that even your thoughts begin to soften, settling into the same slow rhythm as the land around you. Out here, you don't think in sentences. You think in sensations. The weight of your coat, the burn of the air in your lungs, the familiar ache in your shoulders. You move again, one step after another, letting your breath guide you through the monotony of the woods. There is a strange comfort in the repetition, in the sameness. Each step feels nearly identical to the one before it, as if the land is gently erasing your presence behind you. It doesn't matter how far you go, the snow swallows your footprints within minutes, smoothing the world as though you were never here. Eventually you find a quiet clearing, untouched by wind, where the snow lies perfectly level. You pause at its edge, drawn by the serene emptiness. The clearing feels like a deep breath, the kind you take when the world begins to weigh too heavily on your brow. You step into it slowly. The snow gives way beneath you, softening the crunch of your boots. Here the silence feels different. Not heavier, but broader, like a blanket stretched across the sky. You exhale slowly, letting the cold burn its way out of your throat. The air tastes of resin and pine sap, sharp but clean. A gentle wind moves through the treetops, brushing against the needles with a faint crystalline whisper. It is the first sound you've heard all morning that doesn't belong to you. It drifts through the clearing like a reminder that life exists somewhere in the frozen vastness, even if it chooses to stay hidden. You lower your pack and sit on a fallen log, buried halfway in snow. The wood is as cold as stone, but your legs welcome the rest. You close your eyes briefly, not to sleep. Sleep doesn't come easily out here, but to breathe. You inhale the slow, icy scent of the northern woods, letting it fill your chest until it stings. Opening your eyes again, you study the trees. Their branches tilt toward the weight of the snow. Bent but unbroken, you feel a kinship with them. You too have learned how to bow without falling. The day moves quietly, marked only by the slow shifting of light. Time doesn't pass here. It drifts. You stand, gather your pack and continue walking, not because the land calls you forward, but because stopping feels too much like surrender. You move deeper into the woods, where the snow thickens and the trees grow denser. The world narrows again. Your breath softens. The cold settles deeper into your bones, and though the land remains indifferent to your presence, you feel its gaze, not hostile, not welcoming, just aware. Winter has no beginning here, no true end. It simply exists, vast and unchanging, and you move through it with the quiet acceptance of someone who has long since stopped expecting warmth. Out here, the snow never truly melts, it only waits. The clearing fades behind you as you step back into the trees. and the world closes in with the same slow certainty the cold uses when it climbs through cloth and bone. You adjust the strap of your pack, feeling the leather tug against your shoulder, and you begin the long walk north, letting your feet sink into a steady rhythm that matches the breath in your chest. The snow beneath you settles into a predictable pattern of sound, soft, compressed, then softened again, an unhurried crunch that reminds you you're still moving, still waking the frozen silence with each step. Ahead, the land tilts gently toward a frozen river. You've walked along this edge before, though never in exactly the same way. The river shifts each year, reshaping itself under the weight of winter, carving new paths beneath the ice where your eyes can't follow. You climb down the slight bank and step onto the surface, testing each placement of your boot. The ice holds, thick and unmoving, but you still walk with care, always listening for the faint crack that could signal danger. The river gives you something the forest rarely does: space. Even though everything is locked in winter, the wide shape of the waterway lets the sky open a little above you. Pale light stretches across the snow in long, tired lines, and the world feels less crowded, even if no less cold. Your breath drifts ahead of you, scattering across the surface like smoke escaping from an unseen hearth. You follow the river's bend northward. The ice gleams with a faint bluish tint where the wind has swept it clean, leaving a polished surface beneath your boots. Your steps echo more sharply here. The sound carries, bouncing off the invisible walls formed by the tree line on each side. It creates the illusion of another traveller behind you, mimicking your pace with perfect precision. You resist the instinct to glance over your shoulder. Out here, the land often imitates familiarity, but rarely offers it. Eventually, the river narrows. Birch trees lean inward on both banks, as though listening to the quiet groan of the ice beneath your feet. Their white trunks blend with the snowy world so completely that only the dark, peeling edges stand out, thin scars against pale skin. When the river becomes too tight to follow safely, you step off onto a packed ridge of snow and climb back into the forest. The snow on this side is deep, pressing high against your boots, but the path between the trees guides you forward. It isn't a path marked by people. Instead, it's shaped by the wildlife that moves through these woods long before you arrive and long after you leave. Small depressions from rabbits, delicate channels left by foxes, wide packed troughs from wandering moose, all of them create a patchwork of direction, the way lines of ink shape meaning on a page. You read them the way some men read scripture, slowly, carefully, hoping not to miss what lies beneath the surface. Animal tracks tell stories even when nothing else does. You follow a set of narrow prints for a while, perhaps left by a marten, each step angled slightly toward a fallen log, then circling it, then disappearing into a gap between two stones. You pause there, crouching, letting your glove brush lightly across one of the impressions. The indentation is sharp, the edges still crisp, recent. You straighten slowly, eyes drifting across the trees. Nothing moves, nothing breathes loudly enough for you to hear, but the woods feel faintly awake, as though the animal is still nearby, watching you with patient, unbothered eyes. You walk on, steady and unhurried, letting the light filter through branches overhead. The sun doesn't offer warmth, not truly, but it gives a thin brightness that helps when your own shadow begins to blur after hours of walking. The air tastes clean, almost painfully so, like crushed pine needles and untouched frost. You draw it into your lungs slowly, letting the cold scrape along your throat before dissolving somewhere deep inside you. The land grows uneven as you move farther north. Long, rolling rises in the earth force your legs to work harder. Each step sinks into drifts that cling stubbornly to your boots, turning the process of lifting your feet into something that feels more like climbing than walking. Sometimes your breath hitches for a moment, burning at the edges as though the cold has decided to settle just beneath your ribs. You pause briefly. When that happens, Not to rest, not truly, but to let the cold negotiate with your pulse before you push forward again. When the trees thin slightly, you find another frozen stream, smaller and less predictable than the river. Its surface lies uneven, shaped by rocks and fallen branches hidden beneath the ice. You walk beside it rather than on it, letting the soft, steady sound of running water drift faintly through the ice where it hasn't fully seized. The noise is subtle, almost reluctant, as if the stream whispers only because it doesn't remember how to be silent. The sound reminds you that life continues beneath winter, unseen but persistent. Your hands grow stiff inside your mittens, and you flex your fingers to keep them alive. The leather of your gloves has grown rigid from exposure, and the fur lining within stretched thin in places from use. Still, they do their work, even if imperfectly, much like you. As you follow the incline of a small hill, your foot catches on the edge of a buried root. You stumble, catching yourself on a sapling that bends under your weight before springing back with a faint twitch. Snow spills over your boots. You shake it off with a slow exhale. These woods have no interest in harming you directly. They simply wait for exhaustion to do the work for them. You keep your pace steady, not allowing haste to take hold. Haste leads to mistakes, and the mistakes out here have a way of settling themselves quickly and permanently. The wind begins to rise, not strong, but persistent. It slips through the trees with a low, sighing sound, threading between branches like a thin ribbon of cold breath. It pushes against your coat, rustles the fur at your hood, and carries with it the faint scent of distant spruce. You pull the scarf higher across your face until only your eyes remain uncovered. The fabric feels stiff, the frost clinging to it like brittle lace. You round a bend where the forest opens just slightly, revealing a stretch of land where the snow dips into a shallow basin. The depression is lined with old stumps, remnants of a fire long before your time. The charred wood peeks through the snow, coated in ice that glints faintly in the dull light. You descend into the basin slowly, boots sinking into softer powder. Each step feels deeper, heavier, as though the land is trying to hold you in place. Halfway across, you stop. Something catches your attention. Not a sound, not a shape, but a presence, a subtle shift in the air, like a thought forming behind a wall. You turn your head slightly, scanning the trees. Nothing moves. Yet the quiet carries weight, as though the woods have paused, waiting for you to decide whether to keep going. You take a slow breath, steadying yourself, and continue toward the far ridge. The climb is sharper here, snow piled high against the slope. You plant your boots firmly, using your gloved hands to grip exposed roots and branches when the incline steepens. Ice clings to the bark, slick beneath your touch, but you move carefully until the ground levels again. From this vantage point, the land stretches outward in long white waves. The forest continues without end, a tapestry of muted greens and greys, softened by the unrelenting snow. You let your gaze travel across it, tracing the faint outlines of frozen waterways, the shadows of small valleys, the rise of distant hills. Everything seems both vast and close at once, like a world that shifts if you look away from it for too long. You take a slow sip from your water skin, the liquid inside now cold enough to numb your tongue. The wind brushes past you again, soft, steady, indifferent, and you continue onward, letting your boots carve a narrow line northward. You don't walk quickly, you don't need to. The land sets the pace, and you simply follow, matching its quiet persistence, step for step. The afternoon light grows thinner, but it never quite fades. Winter here has a way of smudging the hours together, smoothing the day into one long stretch of pale illumination. You keep moving, reading the tracks, listening to the rhythm of your footsteps, letting the land guide you deeper into territory where snow and silence rule without interruption. Your legs ache, your shoulders tighten beneath the weight of your pack, your breath lingers visibly in the air, before dissolving into the stillness. Yet you walk north because that is where the traps will go. That is where the land waits, unbothered, unmoved, letting you walk across it as though you were little more than a shadow pressed into the white. The crunch of snow steadies you. The cold steadies you. The endless northern path steadies you. And so you keep walking, deeper into a winter that has no intention of ending. The incline levels out at last, and the wind eases, slipping back into the trees as though it has grown tired of trailing you. You pause beneath a canopy of spruce, feeling the heaviness in your shoulders settle. The land ahead softens into a small rise, and on the other side lies the quiet hollow you've used before, a place the snow gathers in gentler shapes, protected by the slope of the land and the thick ring of pines that lean inward like silent sentinels. You move toward it slowly, boots sinking deeper as you cross the soft drifts that have collapsed from higher ground. The hollow feels faintly known, even in winter's endless sameness. The trees here grow tight around each other, their branches lowered under snow, forming a natural wall that shields the wind. The air is still, holding a faint resin scent, the kind that lingers at the edge of memory long after everything else has been scraped clean by the cold. This is where you will stay, at least long enough to build something that can stand between your body and the night. You set down your pack, feeling the strain in your back ease slightly as the weight leaves you. For a moment you simply stand there, letting your breath drift out in long tired curls, studying the land the way one studies the grain of wood before cutting into it. There's a space between two tall pines where the snow rests against a natural dip in the ground. It offers enough shelter to keep the worst winds at bay, and enough room for a structure that doesn't need to be comfortable, just survivable. You kneel and brush aside the top layer of snow with your gloves, revealing the harder crust beneath. Beneath that lies the cold, dull soil, frozen nearly solid. You mark out the footprint of the cabin with slow, deliberate strokes, each line carved through frost in the shape of a life that refuses to disappear. The work begins with gathering. You move through the trees with an old familiar purpose, selecting deadfall branches that haven't softened with rot. You search for trunks of manageable size, testing each one with your hands, feeling for weaknesses hidden beneath the bark. Some break too easily. Others resist with the stubbornness of trees that refuse to surrender even after they've fallen. Those are the ones you take. The sound of chopping breaks the stillness, a blunt, muted thud that echoes weakly through the snow-thick forest. It's not a harsh sound, but it feels intrusive, as though you are disturbing something older than yourself. The axe blade chips away at the wood, each swing sending a pulse up your arm that settles into the muscles like a dull ache. Breath gathers in your scarf, dampening the wool with ice. You can feel your fingers stiffening despite the movement, but you keep at it until the trunk finally splinters in the direction you guide it. When the tree falls, it sinks quietly into the snow, its branches inhaling a soft cloud of powder. There's no drama in the sound, just a long sigh that seems too gentle for the weight of the act. You strip the branches, stacking them beside the clearing. The logs you cut are thick and heavy, their bark rough enough to scrape your gloves. You drag them toward the hollow one by one, the effort pulling at your shoulders, making your breath deepen, slowing your movements. The forest watches without comment. The base of the cabin takes shape gradually, logs laid carefully over one another and packed with snow and earth to seal the gaps. You fit them together with the same patience you use when reading animal tracks, slow, attentive, accepting the land's resistance as part of the work. The structure rises chest high before the muscles in your arms begin to tremble with fatigue. You stop only when the light begins to fade, not abruptly, but in a steady thinning, as though the sky has grown too weary to hold on to brightness. You clear a space inside the unfinished walls and build a small fire with dry chips shaved from the logs. The flame doesn't leap, it creeps upward slowly, flickering with the restraint of a candle in a cold chapel. Still, its warmth brushes the air with a softness the land rarely offers. You hunch near it, letting your gloves rest close enough to thaw the outer layer of frost. The heat doesn't reach deep, but it's enough to remind your hands that they still belong to you. Steam rises from your coat in thin wisps, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp wool. When the fire settles into a steady burn, you lean back against one of the unfinished walls. It gives slightly under your weight, not weakly, but with the same resignation everything out here seems to carry. You close your eyes for a moment, not to sleep but to rest the muscles behind them, listening to the fire crackle quietly, its warmth fading before it even reaches your feet. Later, you bank the flames and step outside. The air bites at your face instantly, clean and sharp as a blade. Snow reflects the rising moonlight in dull, uneven glows, turning the clearing pale and dreamlike. The unfinished cabin stands against the darkness like a skeleton of something that once knew warmth but has forgotten how to hold it. You walk to the tree line, retrieving more branches and small logs for the next day's work. The wind moves through the pines with a sound like distant whispering, though no words form from it. It brushes the frost off needles, letting it fall in tiny, glittering flecks that vanish before they touch the ground. Back inside the hollow, you set the wood down and stretch your hands toward the dying embers. The faint heat brushes your palms, just long enough to loosen your fingers. Then it fades again, leaving the cold to settle into your skin. When you finally lie on your bedroll atop the hard-packed snow, the stiffness of the ground presses through the blanket with stubborn clarity. Cold radiates upward in slow creeping pulses, exploring the spaces between your ribs and spine. You pull the blanket closer, more out of habit than hope. Sleep comes reluctantly. It rarely arrives easily here. Instead, you drift in and out, hovering in a space where the cold becomes a presence rather than a sensation, and the quiet stretches so wide it begins to feel like its own kind of company. During the grey hours before dawn, you wake to a faint cracking sound outside. You rise slowly, pushing aside the blanket, listening for more. It's only the weight of snow sliding from one of the unfinished walls, nothing more. But the sound stays with you, the reminder that the land shifts even when you sleep, reshaping itself without warning. You step outside into the brittle morning air. The sky hangs low, heavy with unmoving clouds that filter the light until it feels like walking inside a dream. You take a long breath that burns faintly at the edges and begin again. The next logs are smaller, easier to lift. You notch their ends and fit them into the growing walls, your fingers stiff but accurate. Snow creeps into the cracks of your gloves, melting briefly, then freezing again into tiny, sharp crystals. You ignore the sting, focusing instead on the shape forming beneath your hands. As the walls rise, the cabin begins to hold back the wind with a fragile steadiness. Not warmth. Warmth is too much to expect, but shelter. A barrier thin enough that you still feel the cold pressing through, yet thick enough that it doesn't overwhelm you. By midday, the doorway stands framed, and you carve a notch for the beam that will support the roof. You hoist it into place, guiding its weight with slow, steady movements. It rests unevenly at first, then settles with a muted thud that echoes lightly through the clearing. You stand beneath it for a moment, breathing deeply, letting the ache in your arms quiet down. The cabin looks humble, little more than a rough shape made from stubborn effort, but it is enough. Out here, enough is its own kind of luxury. You gather pine boughs and lay them across the roof frame, layering them with snow to form a crude insulation. The scent fills the air, sharp, green, fleeting, and for a moment you remember what life smells like when it isn't frozen. Then the wind shifts, carrying the cold back in steady waves, and the scent fades into the background. As evening returns, you sit inside the finished shell of the cabin, fire burning low in the center, smoke curls toward the hole you've left in the roof, weaving through the pine boughs before disappearing into the darkening sky. The walls around you absorb some of the warmth, just enough that your breath doesn't linger as long in the air. It is not comfort, it is survival. A place that half remembers what warmth once felt like, but cannot offer it fully anymore. Still, it stands, and in this endless winter, that is enough. Morning arrives without brightness, just a slow thickening of the pale light seeping through the gaps in the cabin walls. You wake to the faint crackle of the dying fire and the cold pressing through the floorboards you haven't laid yet. The air inside is stiff, almost brittle, as though it has frozen overnight into something you must push aside to breathe. You sit up, rubbing warmth into your hands before pulling on your mittens. The leather feels stiff, shaped more by the cold than by your fingers. You move them slowly, working life back into the joints until you can flex them without pain. There's no urgency, there never is, but there is always work waiting, silent and patient. You step outside, and the cold seals itself around you like a second skin. The cabin stands behind you with quiet resignation, its rough logs crusted in a thin layer of frost that grew overnight. Smoke lingers above the roof, faint and uncertain, blending into the grey morning sky. You look over the clearing, listening for the soft shifting of branches. Nothing moves but the wind, dragging its slow breath through the pines. Near the tree line, your tools lie where you left them yesterday, half buried in snow. You kneel and brush the powder away, revealing the worn shapes beneath. The axe with its blade dulled at the edge, the saw with teeth clogged by frozen sap, the knife whose handle has cracked at the base from too many cold mornings. You gather them with a kind of quiet reverence. Out here, steel is more than metal. It is the thin line between continuation and stopping too soon. You carry everything inside, setting the tools near the fire pit. The embers glow faintly, just alive enough to encourage a new flame. You feed them small twigs, watching the spark catch, then coax it gently until fire blossoms in slow, patient curls. Its warmth touches the air reluctantly, reaching only as far as your hands held close above it. With the fire steady, you unwrap your sharpening stone. It is smooth, worn down from years of use, its surface cool and comforting in its own way. You begin with the knife. The blade passes over the stone with a whispering sound, soft and rhythmic. You draw it toward you again and again, the motion settling into a kind of meditation. Sparks don't fly in this kind of cold. They simply blink and vanish, swallowed by the air before they can drift. As you work, the scent of warmed metal mixes with smoke, forming a quiet reminder of how tools remember their purpose, even when your hands forget their strength. You turn the knife, checking the edge with your thumb, feeling the faint pull of sharpness returning. Not perfect, but good enough. Everything out here lives in degrees of good enough. Next comes the axe. Its handle bears the marks of winter, the grains swollen, the wood slightly split where moisture has found its way in. You run your hand along it, feeling the story of every log it's cut, every hour of labour it has shared. The blade drags across the stone in slower, heavier strokes, each pass tired but determined. You sharpen only until the metal stops resisting, until it gives in and lets itself be reshaped. Outside, the wind grows slightly louder, rattling the pine boughs overhead. Snow slips from a branch and lands with a soft thud near the wall. The world always seems to remind you how easily it can bury anything you leave unattended. You shift to the saw next. Its teeth need careful work. Winter dulls them faster than summer ever could. Ice clings to the metal, melting in thin trails as your hands warm it. You scrape away the residue with slow, deliberate movements, cleaning each tooth before guiding the file across it. The rhythm becomes hypnotic. A stroke for each tooth, a pause, a breath, another stroke. It's a language of effort, one you don't speak aloud but understand deeply. When your tools are ready, you turn to the traps, stacked near the wall. They're stiff with rust and frost, their mechanisms sluggish. You kneel beside them, working each spring with your fingers. The metal groans faintly, as though it resents being woken. You oil the hinges with a small pouch of rendered fat, rubbing it into the joints until they move more smoothly. The faint scent rises into the cabin. Animal grease and iron, a smell that belongs to this life more than any fire or food. You test each trap carefully, feeling the tension settle into place. Their jaws close with a muted snap. Not harsh, just certain. You set them aside, one by one, forming a small pile that represents hours of labour condensed into the shape of survival. When you finally step outside again, the wind has shifted. It slips across the clearing with a colder bite, tugging at your coat, sliding beneath the hem of your scarf. You feel it settle in your lungs when you breathe, a thin, sharp presence that reminds you of distance. Distance from warmth, distance from voices, distance from anything that might break the silence that rules these woods. You retrieve your snowshoes from where they lean against the cabin wall. The frames are old, the rawhide stretched thin in places where winter has gnawed at it. You check each lacing, tightening the strips where they've loosened, testing them with a firm pull. They hold, though not perfectly. Nothing in this land is perfect. Even the trees grow bent beneath the weight of the season. You strap the snowshoes on with slow, practiced movements. The bindings creak softly, whispering in protest. When you stand, you feel the familiar shift in balance, your weight spreading across the wide frames, the snow beneath them, settling into a soft cradle. The sound of your footsteps changes too, the crunch becoming a dull padded whisper. You walk to the edge of the clearing, your tools bundled in a leather wrap slung across your back. The forest greets you the way it always does, with silence, with indifference, with a faint sense that it has watched many men take this same path and forget their own footsteps by spring. If spring ever arrives, you press forward, letting the snowshoes carry you across drifts that would otherwise swallow your legs to the knee. The snow shifts beneath you, in patient waves, compressing with each step. The trees rise around you in uneven columns, their trunks dark beneath the layered frost. You move between them slowly, choosing your path the way one chooses words, carefully, without rushing. Once deeper in the woods, you set down your bundle and prepare to maintain the smaller tools you carry in your coat. The awl, the bone-handled scraper, the small folding blade used to mend your gear. You check their edges, clean the dirt from their handles, tighten the small screws that hold them together. All of it is the kind of work nobody speaks about, but everyone depends on. You make small repairs without thinking, your fingers moving through motions. They've learned so thoroughly, they no longer ask for guidance. You pause when you hear the distant crack of a branch somewhere deeper in the forest. Not the sound of danger, just the weight of snow settling. The land shrugs beneath its own burden, reminding you that time moves here, even when nothing else does. You take a long breath, feeling the cold drag down your throat. Then you pick up your tools again and continue deeper still. The woods open slightly into a small depression where the snow swirls in delicate patterns, shaped by wind that has found a narrow corridor through the trees. You kneel there, adjusting the bindings on your snowshoes, tightening them until they stop shifting beneath your heels. Your fingers grow cold again as you work. You rub them together, feeling the stiffness settle in your knuckles. It's the kind of cold that doesn't sting. It simply dulls, slowly and quietly, until your hands feel like tools themselves, shaped by purpose rather than temperature. As you walk on, your thoughts drift the way they often do when the land grows quiet. You consider the hours ahead, the work waiting in the stillness, checking the lines, repairing broken mechanisms, carving notches in branches to mark your way back. Nothing dramatic, nothing new, just tasks repeated until they become part of the woods themselves. You pause beside a fallen birch, its trunk half buried in snow. The bark peels back in narrow strips, revealing pale wood beneath. You take your knife and trim a piece of it, shaping a small wedge, testing the edge again. Sharp enough, functional. The knife slides into its sheath with a soft click that seems loud against the hush of the forest. You gather your traps and tools once more, securing them tightly so they won't rattle. The weight settles across your shoulders with a familiar heaviness, the kind you no longer resent. You turn toward the deeper ridges of the land, where the snow grows thicker and the world feels more like a giant, unmoving breath. Your steps fall into rhythm again, soft, slow, certain. Work waits deeper in the woods, and you move toward it because that is what keeps you alive. The quiet tending of tools, the slow sharpening of steel, the endless small tasks that shape survival in a winter that forgets to end. The forest settles around you as you walk, your sharpened tools secured beneath the folds of your coat, their weight steady against your ribs. The air feels different after hours of quiet work, colder, sharper, as if the land expects something from you now that your hands are prepared again. Snow drifts fall in lazy spirals between the branches, catching on your sleeves as you move deeper into the narrow corridors, carved by wind and time. You follow no path, not really. The land shapes your direction, guiding you along ridges softened by powder and through hollows wrapped in silence. Every step shifts the snow beneath your snowshoes with a muted sigh, the sound blending into the cold until it becomes part of the forest's breath. You don't move quickly. The woods reward neither haste nor hesitation. You move because the land offers itself to be read, and because reading it is as necessary as fire, as food, as the quiet patience that keeps your hands steady in the deepest cold. Then you see them. At first they're only soft depressions in the powder, shallow, delicate, almost hesitant, but as you approach, the shape of them sharpens. 4 small toes, a narrow pad, the faint brush of fur at the edges where the animal brushed the snow. The wind hasn't touched them yet. The air hasn't softened their edges. They lie as crisp as if they were pressed only moments ago. Fox, light-footed, careful. Its steps weave between the trees with the confidence of something that knows these woods far better than you ever will. You crouch beside the tracks, resting your gloved hand on your knee. The snow beneath the print glimmers faintly in the muted light, reflecting the faintest sheen of moon, still caught behind the morning clouds. The fox moved with purpose, no wandering, no indecision. Its trail curves westward, toward a ridge lined with birch. You trace the path with your eyes, letting the shape of its journey unfold before you. It tells you enough. The fox travelled alone, unhurried, likely hunting. You rise and continue along your own course, not following the animal, but acknowledging the story it left behind. A little farther on, you find another set. These tracks are wider, flatter, with long drag marks on either side, where the creature carried its weight awkwardly. The prints dip deep into the snow, pressing almost to the ground beneath. The spacing between them is close, each step calculated, nearly cautious. Beaver, travelling away from water, searching for saplings or bark, heavy, determined, shaped by instinct older than memory. You kneel again, brushing snow away from one of the indentations. The air near the tracks feels colder, as though the beaver's slow, steady movement has not yet faded from the land. You picture it waddling through the drifts, with the patience of a creature that understands winter differently, less as hardship, more as routine. The path leads toward the frozen creek you passed earlier. You imagine the beaver sliding down the bank, body brushing the hard-packed snow, leaving behind the faint impressions that mark its journey home. But you leave the tracks untouched. The story is enough. You continue walking until the trees open into a long corridor of untouched snow, smooth as cloth laid over a quiet room. The wind hasn't passed through here, No branches have bent low enough to disturb the surface. It's a stretch of pure, unbroken white. Rare this deep into the season. Then you see the dark line cutting through the smoothness. It's thin at first, a faint suggestion, where the snow dips slightly. But as you approach, the shape emerges clearly. Deep prints, arranged in careful pairs, each one angled slightly outward. Long stride, heavy steps, a creature that moves with quiet confidence and deliberate purpose. Wolf. You stop beside the first print and let your gaze travel forward. The steps continue into the distance, weaving between the trees, with a grace that belies the animal's weight. The snow around each print has settled into soft mounds, the edges still crisp, untouched by wind. The wolf passed here during the night, under a pale, distant moon. You crouch, brushing away a thin crust from one of the prints. Beneath it, the impression remains firm and dark, shaped by a creature whose weight pressed deep enough to disturb the frozen layer below. There is strength in the mark, but also restraint. Wolves do not waste energy in winter unless necessary. You examine the spacing between prints, long strides, unhurried, not hunting, not fleeing, merely moving through its territory, claiming nothing, fearing nothing, acknowledging the world with the quiet authority of something born into the cold rather than fighting it. The forest feels different while you study the tracks. Not threatening, not welcoming, just more aware, as if the wolf's passing has stirred the woods into a deeper consciousness. You rise and follow the line of prints, only long enough to understand their direction. North, toward the heavier ridges where deer sometimes linger. You don't follow farther. There is no need. The wolf's story continues without you, stretching forward into a part of the land that isn't yours to walk. Farther ahead, beneath a spruce weighed down by snow, another set of tracks catches your eye. These are smaller, more delicate, quick, darting impressions that skip across the surface in uneven patterns. Tiny claw marks pinch the front of each print, and the spacing shows a jittery energy. Marten, you don't need to kneel to read this one. The story is written in motion rather than shape. The marten moved erratically, zigzagging between the trees, with the unpredictable urgency of a creature always hungry and always hunted. Its trail disappears beneath a fallen trunk, then reappears on the other side in a light scattering of prints, almost playful. You follow it for a short distance until the tracks vanish, where the snow thickens, swallowed by the drifts. Lightweight creatures leave faint footprints. Easy to read, easier still for winter to erase. As you press deeper into the woods, the light changes. Clouds drift aside, revealing a silver sky, the kind that carries the faint memory of moon, even in daylight. The snow reflects it softly, giving the forest an ethereal glow. Shadows blur, edges soften. You feel as though you're walking through a world only half awake. Then in a quiet clearing, you find the prints you've been waiting for. They sit in a long arc across the snow, deep, wide, heavy. The kind that speak not only of movement but of hunger, patience and calculation. The creature circled the clearing before choosing a direction. It paused, turned, stepped forward again. Large paws pressed into the drifts, spreading its weight in deliberate, mindful steps. Wolf? Another one? Or perhaps the same. But this one lingered, studied, considered. You kneel at the centre of the clearing, touching the snow lightly. The prints curve toward a cluster of trees, where the branches hang low, forming a dark pocket of shelter. A few tufts of fur cling to the bark where something brushed too closely. You pluck one between your fingers. It feels coarse, frozen stiff. The cold holding it in the shape the night left it. You let it fall and study the clearing again. The story here is simple. A wolf watched, a wolf waited, a wolf listened. Not for you. Something smaller, weaker, hidden now beneath snow or branches. The land keeps many secrets, and most of them end in hunger, either satisfied or postponed. You rise and take a slow breath, the cold filling your lungs with a faint burn. Then you continue your journey, reading the subtle etchings in the snow, as though they were lines of an old text written for those patient enough to read it. The forest becomes a ledger written in tracks, each print a word, each path a sentence, the snow the page on which the cold writes its quiet, relentless stories. You walk until the light fades, until the trees blur into shadows, until the world grows too dim to follow the faintest markings. Then, under the soft glow of early moonlight, you turn back toward the shelter you built, your snowshoes whispering against the drifts, your breath rising in slow ribbons, the stories of the forest settling behind you, like pages gently closing. The land grows still again. Whatever walked here moves elsewhere now, and you move through the quiet, reading the last fading tracks until the dark folds itself around them, hiding them from sight until morning. By the time you make your way back through the thinning light, the world has settled into a blue-grey hush, a kind of twilight that lasts longer out here than anywhere you've ever known. Each step sinks softly into the drifts, your snowshoes releasing a muted sigh with every lift. The trees around you hold their stillness like an old oath, branches heavy with frost that creaks faintly when a breeze threads through them. You reach the dim outline of your cabin as the sky begins folding into darkness. The place looks small against the weight of the night, just a rough shelter stitched together by cold hands and dwindling daylight. Smoke curls weakly from the hole in the roof, a thin, wavering line swallowed almost immediately by the dark. It carries the scent of resin and damp bark, a reminder of a fire that has worked all day to do little more than keep the air inside alive. Opening the door, you step into the cramped interior. The warmth steals over you slowly, not in a rush but as a reluctant offering. The fire burns low in the pit, its glow faint, like a memory of heat rather than the thing itself. You kneel beside it, feeding it thin branches you gathered earlier. They hiss softly as frost melts from their bark, then catch with a subdued crackle. It's enough to keep the cold from claiming the cabin fully, though it never pushes it entirely back. You remove your gloves and hold your hands out to the fire. The heat brushes your palms gently, barely warming them, but enough to undo the numbness settling into your fingers. The skin feels stiff, reddened, not painful, just exhausted. The cold has a way of softening sensation until only the memory of warmth remains. Snow melts slowly from the fur at your cuffs, dripping onto the packed ground in quiet clicks. The air carries the faint scent of smoke and boiled leather, soaked into the walls after days of fire that never fully dries anything. You stir the embers again, coaxing a small flame higher, knowing it will only shrink back the moment you stop watching it. Night settles fully outside, pressing gently against the logs. The forest's voice changes with it. The wind quiets. The branches groan under the cold. Somewhere far off, something shifts the snow, but the sound is too faint to name. The stillness that follows feels old, as though the woods are telling stories in a language you were not born to understand. You pull your pot from where it sits on a low shelf and fill it with snow. The metal bites your fingers as you set it above the fire, the heat beginning to melt the powder into a thin, clear liquid. It takes time, more time than your stomach would prefer, but winter doesn't believe in speed. You've learned to accept the pace, even when hunger presses against your ribs. While the snow melts, you sift through the small bundle of supplies you carry, a handful of dried meat, a piece of hard bread, a scrap of fat wrapped in cloth. None of it feels generous, but generosity isn't something you expect from these woods. You add a sliver of meat to the pot, letting it soften and darken the water. The smell rises slowly, faint but comforting, an echo of the meals you once had, when warmth wasn't something you had to bargain with. You eat with deliberate movements, each bite taken slowly, the heat of the broth lingering only long enough to thaw the inside of your mouth before fading again. When you finish, you set the pot aside and wipe your hands on the fabric of your trousers, the cloth stiff with dried frost. The fire burns low once more, its flame retreating into the heart of the embers. You lean closer, extending your hands again, feeling only the edges of warmth. Out here, fire never becomes the companion it is in other places. It remains a fragile thing, useful, necessary, but distant. It gives just enough to keep your fingers working, to let your tools be held, to allow your legs another morning of movement. You listen to the woods. They whisper in a language shaped by wind slipping through needles and the distant snapping of branches shedding their snow. Sometimes the sound seems to rise and fall like breath. Other times, it drifts like fragments of stories too old to remember their beginnings. You stretch your legs out and let your back rest against the cabin wall. The log is cold behind you, its surface rough and uneven, marked by knots and the sharp ridges where your axe bit into the bark days ago. You close your eyes briefly, not to sleep but to let the strain behind them settle. The cold seeps into your coat, but you make no effort to fight it. Fighting cold only teaches it where you are vulnerable. The night deepens, the fire flickers against the walls, casting shadows that move like slow sighs. You breathe deeply, smelling pine resin and smoke. The air inside the cabin feels thicker, warmed slightly by your breath and the fire's persistence. But even here, with the walls holding back most of the wind, you can feel winter pressing through the gaps, searching, testing, creeping through the smallest cracks like a patient hand. You reach for your blanket and drape it around your shoulders, pulling it tight against the chill. The fabric carries the scent of wood smoke, animal fat, and damp wool. You've slept with worse, you've slept with less. Outside, the moon rises unseen behind the clouds. Its pale glow seeps through them, turning the world beyond your doorway into a faint wash of silver. You watch its light creep along the edge of the clearing, touching the snow in slow movements, like frost spreading over glass. You think about the tracks you read earlier, the fox weaving through the birch, the beaver trudging toward the creek, the marten dancing between fallen logs, the wolf moving through the clearing with the quiet purpose of something born from winter itself. Their stories linger in your mind, shaped by distance and silence. Out here, animals tell the only stories that matter, stories of hunger, movement, survival. Your fire answers with another soft crack. The flame flickers, then steadies, as if remembering its duty. You shift your weight, letting your legs stretch out, boots pointed toward the door. The cold around your feet is sharper. You wiggle your toes inside their wrappings, making sure they haven't stiffened too much. The cold has a habit of creeping quietly into extremities, waiting until you stop paying attention before tightening its grip. You rub the warmth back into them slowly. Time passes in a slow drift. The world outside gives no sign of movement, no shift in sound. The forest feels asleep, yet watchful, as if everything, trees, snow, sky, keeps one eye half open even through the deepest hours. You add one last log to the fire, watching as the flame licks at the bark, hesitant at first, then settling into a steady, tired glow. You hold your hands over it once more, absorbing what little heat it offers. Enough to move, enough to last, not enough to thaw the space between your bones. You lie back on your bedroll, pulling the blanket tight around you. The ground beneath is hard and unyielding, but familiar. The cabin groans softly as the temperature drops outside, the logs shifting in the cold. You breathe slowly, letting the chilled air pass into your lungs, then back out in long, quiet plumes. The fire dims to a smoulder, casting faint light across the cabin. The warmth fades in intervals, leaving behind a memory of heat rather than the thing itself. You close your eyes, listening to the whispers outside, soft, drifting sounds shaped by wind and old trees. They tell no stories meant for you, yet they fill the night, threading through your thoughts until they blur into something peaceful, something tired, something quiet. And in that quiet, you lie beside a fire that has never once burned hot enough, letting the cold wrap itself around you like a familiar companion as the long winter night continues its slow, unbroken march across the land. The fire has dwindled to a soft red glow when you finally push yourself upright, feeling the stiffness cling to your limbs like frost. Dawn hasn't arrived yet, not truly. Instead, the world outside holds the same muted grey that comes before all colour, a kind of quiet pause between night and something trying to become morning. You wrap your coat tighter and step outside. The cold greets you with the familiarity of an old obligation, neither hostile nor kind, simply present. Each breath curls upward in the still air, lingering longer than you expect, as though even your breath hesitates to move in this heavy season. Snow clings to your boots as you tread toward the tree line. It's deeper today, the drifts reshaped by the night's wind into uneven waves. Your snowshoes hang against the cabin wall, their frames rigid with frost. You strap them on slowly, listening to the faint creaks of leather adjusting to the weight of your steps. Once settled, you begin the long walk toward the first trapline. The woods wake in small ways as you move through them, not with noise, but with the subtle acknowledgements of presence, the shift of a branch, the soft give of snow beneath your weight, the almost inaudible sigh of wind moving between pines. You've walked this land long enough to understand that the forest never truly sleeps. It only waits. The traps lie scattered across the territory, in quiet intervals, each one placed with care, each one holding its own small story. Some cling to low branches, ice stiff from days of cold. Others sit half buried near frozen streams, their shapes softened by powder. You kneel beside the first one, brushing snow away with your gloves. Inside the jaws lies a fox, its fur bright, even in the muted light. Snow dusts its back, and its body rests in the stillness that winter grants all creatures eventually. You lift it gently, feeling the weight settle into your arms, the cold of the pelt seeping through your gloves. There's no triumph in the moment, only a quiet understanding that survival demands its payment from every living thing. You set the fox aside and reset the trap with slow, familiar movements. The metal springs groan softly as you pull them back into place. You check the tension, secure the stake, and cover the mechanism lightly with snow. The work requires calm hands, steady breath, and the patience that the cold has carved into you over months. You strap the fox to your pack and continue down the trail. The next trap sits beneath a fallen spruce, its branches bowed under layers of ice. When you lift the boughs aside, you find a marten curled within, its fur thick and soft, still warm enough to remind you that its last moments happened not long before you arrived. You pause, using your knife to clean the mechanism before resetting it. The blade glints briefly, catching what little light filters through the trees. As you wrap the pelt carefully, you can't help but think how eagerly it will be traded, how hands in faraway places will brush against its softness without ever knowing the cold that shaped it. Their hearths will burn bright, their coats will hold heat, their children will sleep without fear of frost creeping through the walls. The thought lingers, neither bitter nor resentful, simply factual, the way winter itself is factual. The world is built on quiet exchanges no one speaks about. Some people pay in coin, others pay in cold hands and empty landscapes. The trail bends toward a frozen marsh where the ice lies dull beneath a layer of snow. You test the surface with your foot before stepping onto it. It holds, though the faint crack beneath reminds you not to trust it more than necessary. Your traps are scattered along the reeds, buried halfway beneath frost. One sits empty, sprung by nothing more than a fallen twig. Another holds a hare, its body light, delicate, already stiff. You lift it gently, brushing snow from its fur. The smallness of it settles strangely in your hands, a reminder that the cold doesn't spare anything, not even creatures built for silence and speed. You place it in your pack beside the others, securing it with a strip of hide. The air remains still as you make your way farther north to where the largest traps lie. These require more attention, more work, more time. You trudge through thicker drifts, your snowshoes sinking slightly with each step. Frost settles in your scarf. The cold stings the tip of your nose, but each movement becomes part of the rhythm, an unhurried, steady pattern that your body follows without needing to be asked. The largest trapline sits near a ridge where the snow slopes downward toward a ravine. Here, the wind gathers strength, sweeping through the trees with long, low sighs. You brace yourself against it, adjusting your hood. The first trap here holds nothing. The bait remains untouched, the snow around it undisturbed. The second holds a fisher, larger than a marten, more restless in life, more valued in trade. You kneel beside it, working the trap open with careful pressure. Your gloves slip against the frozen metal, but eventually the mechanism yields. You lift the fisher by its legs, thankful for the thickness of your mittens. Its fur is dark, coarse, but rich enough to earn goods you haven't tasted since early autumn. You secure it to your pack beside the others, feeling the weight grow heavier across your shoulders. Not unbearable, just familiar. The final trap on this line sits near the edge of the ravine. You move toward it slowly, placing your snowshoes at angles to keep your footing. The trap is half buried beneath fresh drift, but the tension on the line tells a story before you even uncover it. When you brush the snow aside, you find a beaver caught deep in the mechanism, its thick fur dusted with frost. Large, sturdy, shaped by a life of cutting through water and building against current. Its weight strains the trap, the cold making every movement slower as you work to release it. You drag it onto solid ground, its pelts solid from the night chill, but still holding the dense warmth it was built for. You rest for a moment, letting your breath settle. The load on your back has grown heavy, thick with the work of several days, the labour of long hours and colder nights. But nothing in this life moves quickly, not even burden. You adjust the straps and take a slow breath, pushing your way back up the slope. The forest grows quieter as you retrace your steps. Snow muffles everything. Even your own movement disappears into the landscape, swallowed by winter's indifference. In the distance, a crow calls once, a sharp sound that cuts through the stillness like a blade. It echoes briefly, then fades into the vastness. As you walk, your thoughts drift toward the distant world your pelts will eventually reach. The hands that will trade for them, the fires that will warm the rooms where they're sorted, the markets where they will be bartered for coins you will never see. You picture soft-furred collars resting on shoulders that have never touched a snow shovel. Children wrapped in warmth earned by landscapes they've never imagined. Not envy, not resentment, just a quiet, tired acknowledgement of the strange trade that binds distant lives, the comfort of one world paid for by the cold labour of another. The trees thin as you near the clearing where your cabin waits. Smoke rises faintly from the roof again, the fire inside doing its best to hold back the ever-present cold. You push through the last stretch of drifts and step into the hollow. You loosen your pack and let it fall gently to the snow. Your shoulders throb with relief, your breath leaving you in long, tired ribbons. You take a moment before carrying the pelts inside, letting the cold settle into you before the faint warmth of the cabin pushes against it. Inside, the firelight flickers against the walls, offering the smallest promise of heat. You hang the pelts beside the hearth, letting the air thaw them slowly. The scent of fur, snow and smoke fills the space, blending into the atmosphere of steady labour. You sit beside the flame, stretching your tired hands toward it. The warmth reaches you only halfway, fading before it reaches your bones. Still you hold your hands there, watching the fire work, feeling the weight of a day spent trading solitude for pelts. The quiet exchange that keeps you alive in a winter that seems to have forgotten how to end. The pelts hang near the fire, slowly thawing in the faint warmth that clings to the interior walls. You sit beside them for a while, letting your breath settle and your shoulders loosen. The day's work has seeped into your muscles, leaving behind a dull heaviness that feels almost comforting in its familiarity. Outside, night drags itself across the clearing, and the wind grows quiet again, as if stopping to catch its breath. When morning comes, it arrives without fanfare. Just a gradual brightening of the cabin's interior, a thin wash of pale light slipping through the cracks between the logs. You rise with slow movements, wrapping your coat around you before stepping into the cold. The air carries a sharper edge than the day before, the kind that touches your skin like a warning. Your breath travels ahead of you, in thin ribbons as you make your way past the pines, following no path except the one your feet choose in the moment. The snow lies untouched, smooth as pulled linen across the open stretches. You walk until the trees loosen their hold on the sky, and the land lifts into a gentle rise. The clearing beyond opens wide, a long hollow where the forest thins and the air feels less confined. As you step into it, something shifts overhead. A faint flutter, a subtle movement in a sky the colour of old porcelain. You pause, tilting your chin upward. At first you see nothing but pale clouds, drifting in slow, uncertain shapes. Then the movement comes again, clearer this time, a dark ripple against the grey. You squint and shapes begin to form, small clustered silhouettes crossing in a quiet, deliberate line. Birds, silent travellers moving across the cold sky with the steady confidence of creatures that know their place, even in a season that forgets nearly everything else. Their wings beat in perfect rhythm, soft, measured strokes that look too delicate to cut through winter, yet somehow do. You watch them pass overhead, their bodies shifting in a loose formation, not hurried, not wandering. Each one moves as though connected by an invisible thread, a shared instinct, pulling them toward distant regions you can't see from where you stand. They have no need for shelter, no fire to coax warmth from, no pelts to carry on their backs. They move through the season like a breath gliding between ribs. Quiet, necessary, unstoppable. More birds appear from behind the tree line to your left. Their wings catch the faint light, revealing streaks of white along their feathers. They dip, rise and settle into the same path as the first group, joining the long, unbroken chain moving across the sky. You listen for sound, anything that might break the stillness. But the birds make no noise, not a call, not a cry, only the silent pulse of wings, brushing the cold air. It's as if the sky itself carries them unhindered, their passage marked only by the faint stir of shifting current high above your head. For a moment, the harshness of the land softens. The silence feels different, not heavy, not empty, but calm, like a moment carved out of the season just for watching. You take a few more steps into the clearing, your boots sinking deeper into the untouched snow. The birds continue forward, crossing into the open sky above the ridges you walked near days before. Their path arcs slightly, forming a ribbon of dark specks moving steadily toward the horizon. You stand there longer than you intend, letting the sight anchor you in a way nothing else has for days. The cold presses against your coat, sliding beneath the edges of your scarf, but you don't move, not yet. Eventually the flock thins, each cluster drifting toward the line where sky meets forest. The last of them glide across the clearing, wings slicing through the pale air with effortless grace. You lower your gaze slowly, following their path until they disappear behind distant swells of land. When the sky empties again, it leaves behind a silence that feels almost new. You breathe it in, then you start walking, not toward the cabin, not toward the traps, just forward, letting the land guide you once more. Your feet carry you toward the slope that borders the clearing, a gradual rise where the trees lean in different directions, shaped by years of unrelenting wind. Their branches creak softly overhead as you pass beneath them, sending down small showers of ice that glitter before melting into the folds of your coat. As you climb the ridge, the sky opens wider, revealing a sweep of pale blue breaking through the clouds. The sun, hidden for days, peeks through faintly, little more than a dim coin of light. It touches the snow in scattered patches, bright enough to make the surface sparkle, but not warm enough to change anything. You reach the ridge and look out across the expanse below. The land stretches far beyond what your eyes can take in. Mounded drifts, frozen creeks, dark clusters of spruce, rising like islands from a white sea. And above it all, the sky remains vast and quiet, holding the faint imprint of the birds, even though they are long gone. The forest around you responds to the change in light. A pine branch loosens its grip on accumulated snow, sending a cascade to the ground. A distant tree groans as the slight warmth shifts the ice around its trunk. Far off, something small scurries beneath the powder, its movement creating tiny ripples across the surface. Yet the quiet remains. Even with motion returning to the land, the stillness keeps its hold. You descend the opposite side of the ridge slowly, planting your boots carefully to avoid slipping on the hidden crust beneath the snow. Each step feels measured, grounding you against the vastness above. Near a sheltered dip in the earth, you pause again. A single bird sits on a thin branch, feathers puffed against the cold, small, mottled, its tiny body trembling with the effort of holding heat. It watches you with dark eyes, not fearful, not curious, simply aware. It flicks its wings once, twice, then leaps into the air with a sudden burst of motion. The wings beat quickly, erratically, but soon the bird steadies and flies toward the thicker woods. You follow its path with your eyes until the small shape disappears behind a stand of birch. Its quick departure feels like a reminder. Movement continues, even when everything else seems frozen into place. You continue walking until the slope levels out into a narrow corridor where the trees form a natural archway overhead. The wind moves gently through the branches here, creating a soft rustle that sounds almost like breathing. The canopy above lets through the thin slivers of light that touch the snow in delicate patterns, like faded writing across parchment. You pause beneath the archway, drawing in a deep breath. The air smells faintly of cold resin and distant water, the scent carried from the creek that lies somewhere beyond the rise to your right. The smell reminds you of the beaver tracks you saw days before, of the slow, purposeful movement of creatures who navigate this land without hesitation. As you walk deeper into the corridor, the sky reappears between the branches, wider this time. A few lone birds drift across it, scattered remnants of earlier flocks. Their wings beat slower than the ones that came before, as though fatigue has settled into their bodies after long hours of flight. You watch them glide, their silhouettes small against the pale sky. The sight carries no urgency, no message, just a quiet reminder that the world moves on in ways both vast and subtle. You reach the end of the corridor and step into a small clearing, partially sheltered from the wind. It feels like a pocket of stillness carved out of the landscape, a place where snow falls in lazy spirals and sound softens into a gentle hush. You sit on a fallen log, letting the cold seep into you, unhurried and predictable. The sky above remains open, a wide unfolding canvas where the occasional bird cuts across the pale blue. The longer you sit, the more the forest breathes around you. Branches sway softly. Ice cracks in distant shadows. Snowflakes drift from the higher canopy in slow, thoughtful movements. And every so often, a bird crosses the sky, sometimes alone, sometimes paired, sometimes in small clusters whose wings move in perfect union. You watch them all. Their quiet passage softens the edges of the land, offering a gentler face to a season that rarely shows one. Their flight feels like a whispered reassurance, a reminder that even in a winter that forgets how to end, something still moves freely through the cold. Eventually, you rise again. The sky behind you holds the last faint shapes of wings, and the snow in front of you waits, untouched, ready to receive your steps. The clearing grows dim as the afternoon settles into its long muted descent toward dusk. You rise from the fallen log, brushing snow from your coat, and begin moving again. The cold has a way of reminding your legs to keep working, nudging you forward before stillness turns against you. The air carries that familiar metallic sharpness, the kind that settles against your tongue and never fully leaves. The trees gather around you as you walk, their branches closing into a quiet, cathedral-like space overhead. Snow falls from the highest boughs in soft murmurs, drifting through the narrow shafts of light that still manage to slip between the branches. You follow the slow rhythm of your breath, letting it guide your pace. Not far ahead, faint lines appear in the snow, tracks not shaped by animals, wider, heavier, less graceful. The pattern breaks the natural flow of the woods, a human imprint pressed into the landscape with the same kind of weary urgency you know too well. You pause, studying the prints. They are not fresh, though not old enough to have been swallowed by the night's wind. A day, perhaps two. You follow the direction they came from, more out of instinct than expectation. Human presence rarely lingers long in these woods. The land has a way of scattering people across its vastness, keeping them far apart, as if solitude were just another resource winter refuses to share. As you walk, the sound of your snowshoes blends with the faint creaks of the trees. Your steps feel heavier now, pressed deeper, not just by the snow, but by the thought of voices, real voices, breaking the stillness of the land. A few bends later, you see smoke rising above a cluster of low pines. Not the thin, wavering smoke of a dying fire, but a thicker curl, steady enough to signal someone tending it. You slow your pace out of caution and habit, though there's little danger between trappers. Out here, there is no bounty worth fighting for, only survival, and even that feels shared in some tired, unspoken way. You step into a small clearing where another rough shelter leans against a fallen tree. A man crouches near a fire pit, adjusting the logs with the deliberate movements of someone who has repeated the motion 1,000 times. His coat is patched with fur from animals that have long passed through the seasons. His scarf covers most of his face, leaving only his eyes visible. Tired eyes, but alert. He hears your approach and looks up. You lift a hand in greeting, and he nods once, slow and cautious, before straightening. His snowshoes are propped beside the shelter, coated with a thin crust of ice. A small bundle of pelts lies near the fire, thawing in its weak warmth. You stop a few paces away, letting the silence settle before you speak. Words don't arrive quickly here. They emerge tired, as if they too must push through snow before reaching your mouth. Cold day, you say through your scarf. His reply comes muffled. Always is. He gestures toward the fire. You step closer, lowering yourself onto a log opposite him. The heat doesn't travel far, but it touches the air enough to loosen the stiffness in your hands. You hold them out for a moment, letting the warmth brush against your gloves. The man adjusts his scarf, revealing a weathered face lined with frostbitten years. He studies you with the unhurried caution of someone accustomed to long silences. Haven't seen tracks in days, he says. Thought I was the only fool walking this stretch. You give a small shrug. Hard to tell where anyone is in this cold. Could be a dozen men out here, and you'd never hear them. He huffs a faint sound, not quite a laugh. Reckon that's true. For a while, neither of you speaks. The fire crackles in small, sputtering bursts. Struggling to find strength in the wet wood, the scent of resin drifts upward, mingling with the cold air. You watch the flames dance, their glow reflecting in the man's eyes, softening the fatigue etched around them. Eventually he nudges the bundle of pelts with his boot. Trade's been thin, he murmurs. Lines froze over. Lost 3 traps to ice. Might lose more before week's out. You nod. Every trapline in this land feels like a gamble. The weather claims some without apology, swallowing them beneath drifts or snapping them under shifting ice. You understand the resignation in his voice. It's the same tone you carry in your own thoughts, though you rarely bother giving it shape. He points at your pack. Find anything worth the trouble? You open it slightly, showing him the pelts you gathered. Fox, marten, hare, beaver. His eyes linger on the fisher. He whistles low. That's a good catch, he says. Fine fur. They'll pay well for that. You feel the weight of that truth. Not in coin. You rarely see more than a fraction of the profit, but in the steady chain of trade. Your frozen hands, your long nights, your endless patience, feeding warmth into houses built far from these woods. Maybe, you say quietly. He pokes the fire with a stick, sending a small shower of sparks upward. The glow reflects briefly on the underside of the branches, then vanishes into the grey air. Funny thing, he says, after a moment. We work out here alone, days on end, then meet someone and have nothing to say but the cold and the traps. You give a faint, tired smile beneath your scarf. Can't imagine what else there is to talk about. He nods at that, settling into a comfortable quiet. Not an awkward one. Just the kind of silence that belongs to people who understand that words aren't needed to recognize another's struggle. After a few minutes, he reaches into a small pouch and pulls out a piece of dried meat. He offers it with a gloved hand. You accept. The gesture is simple, but not small. Food shared in winter is a kind of trust. You chew slowly, letting the salted flavour settle on your tongue. It's tough, dry, but better than most meals out here. You passing through? He asks eventually. Heading south by tomorrow. He nods, accepting the answer without question. No one asks for details in these woods. Paths cross when they cross, and then they drift apart again, each man following his own line through the snow. The wind shifts, stirring the smoke. It drifts across your face, carrying with it the warmth of the fire. The man gathers his pelts and begins packing them. Careful movements shaped by habit. Sun'll drop soon, he says. Best walk before the cold thickens. You stand adjusting the straps of your pack. The weight feels more manageable than before, warmed slightly by the fire. He stands as well, pulling his scarf back over his face. Before you turn to leave, he lifts a hand briefly, a gesture that could mean farewell or good luck or nothing at all. You return it, then step back into the trees. Behind you, the fire crackles softly. Ahead, the forest closes around you again, swallowing the clearing until it becomes just another pocket of memory among the many scattered across this land. Your breath meets the cold air in slow drifting clouds. The snow shifts beneath your steps. The woods grow quiet once more, quiet in the way only winter knows, where even the faint company of another man fades quickly, leaving you alone with the long, patient rhythm of the season. And though the meeting was brief and the words few, something settles in your chest. Light, faint, almost like warmth. Not enough to change the cold. Just enough to remind you that the world still holds other travellers, other hands working against the same winter, other breaths forming pale clouds in the frozen air. You keep walking, the silence returning around you, steady and familiar, the forest guiding your way through snow that has already begun to fall again. The forest swallows the faint sound of the other trapper's fire, long before you've walked out of sight. By the time the clearing disappears behind a tangle of spruce branches, you're alone again, surrounded by the familiar hush of snow-softened earth. Your breath drifts in steady clouds, each one fading into the stillness as quickly as it forms. The silence seems deeper now, less heavy, but somehow wider, as though the woods acknowledge the brief meeting and then reclaim you without ceremony. You move forward with measured steps, following the slow rhythm your body has learned over countless days. The landscape begins to shift as you travel, the trees spreading farther apart, the woods no longer pressing inward so tightly. The snow grows denser too, piled higher where the wind has carried it, sculpting ridges and valleys where paths once lay. Hours pass without you marking them. the sky dimming toward that pale grey blue that signals the day's quiet descent. You adjust your pack as the weight of the pelts presses into your shoulders. The straps bite through layers of fur and wool, but you've grown so used to the discomfort, it feels more like an expected companion than a burden. The land tilts gradually downward, revealing the faint outline of a frozen river, a wide band of white running between low snow-capped banks. You follow its course, your snowshoes crunching through the brittleness of the top crust. The river leads you toward a thinning in the trees, a place where the wilderness loosens its grip just enough to allow something else to exist. A faint column of smoke rises beyond the crest of a small hill. You slow your steps without thinking. In this land, smoke means one of only two things: danger or company. But here, on the distant outskirts of the trade route, the scent drifting through the cold air tells you which. Tobacco, pine pitch, burnt wool, a trading post, the first piece of what some would call civilization, though the word feels too heavy for the small structure waiting ahead. As you crest the hill, the building comes into view, a squat log cabin with a roof weighed down by snow and a barred window that glows with faint orange light. A rough wooden sign hangs crookedly above the door, its letters nearly buried under frost. Beside the doorway, a rack leans against the wall, cluttered with snowshoes abandoned by travellers from days past. You approach slowly, your boots sinking deeper with each step, until the packed earth path near the door gives you firmer footing. The smell of the fire inside reaches you first, strong, dry, tinged with the sharpness of tobacco smoke. It's a scent that doesn't belong to the forest, but to the handful of men who live between it and the distant settlements beyond. Your gloved hand rests on the thick door for a moment before pushing it open. Warmth doesn't rush out, it hesitates, as if uncertain whether you deserve it. But it does seep into the cold air around you, coaxing your face into feeling something other than numbness. Inside, the light is dim, cast mostly by a low fire burning in a stone hearth at the far wall. Shadows stretch across the beams overhead, shaped by the flickering flames. A man stands behind a rough-hewn counter, sorting through bundles of fur. His coat remains on, even inside, though it hangs open to reveal a worn vest beneath. He looks up as you step inside, eyes flicking briefly to your pack before returning to his work. Another figure sits near the hearth, boots stretched toward the warmth, coat steaming slightly from melted snow. His face is half hidden by a scarf, but the posture, tired, shoulders slumped, hands wrapped tightly around a tin cup, tells you everything. Another trapper resting before heading farther into the cold. The trader nods toward you. Long way to walk for a fire. His voice carries a rough edge, shaped less by hostility and more by the dry rasp of someone who speaks only when necessary. You shrug out of your pack, setting it on the counter with slow, careful movements. Long way to walk for anything, you reply. He gives a small grunt that might be agreement, then gestures for you to open the bundle. You unfold the pelts, laying them one by one across the wooden surface. The fox, the marten, the hare, the fisher, the beaver. He examines each with the hands of someone who has studied fur longer than he's studied faces. He lifts the fisher first, running his fingers along the grain. Good fur, he says softly. Clean lines. Cold season helps. You nod. It was moving steady. He doesn't respond, simply sets the pelt aside and reaches for the beaver. The room fills with the soft rustle of fur against wood, the brittle crackle of thawing edges. Behind you, the trapper near the fire shifts in his seat, the legs of his chair scraping faintly against the uneven floorboards. Someone coughs in the back room, short, dry, tired. The sound blends with the fire's soft pop and the quiet creak of the roof settling under snow. You remove your gloves, letting your hands hover near the warmth of the hearth. The skin prickles painfully at first as sensation returns, but the ache fades into something bearable. The room feels heavy with the weight of travel, of silence, of men spending more time alone than together. The trader finishes inspecting the pelts and moves to the shelves behind him. They hold boxes of powder, tins of dried meat, coils of rope, small knives, wrapped blankets, tobacco bundles, wool socks, and a handful of brass buttons that shine faintly in the firelight. He counts a few coins onto the counter, small dull pieces that clink dully. "Prices aren't what they used to be," he mutters. You slide the coins toward your hand. They feel cold despite the warmth of the room. Never are. He offers you a tin cup of something warm. Broth, maybe, though thin enough that calling it soup would be generous. You drink it slowly, letting the warmth settle in your chest. The other trapper glances at you, offering a small nod. His face is burnt by wind, marked by lines carved from years spent tracing the same invisible routes through the wilderness. "Snow came early," he says, in a low voice. "Feels like it never left," you answer. He lifts his cup in the faintest gesture of agreement. "Trap's been freezing faster than I can check them." His voice carries the same quiet fatigue you've heard in your own breath, the same acceptance of a season that doesn't bargain. You rest your cup on the floor and lean back against the wall, letting the warmth of the hearth soak into your coat. Not comfort, just a little less cold. The trader stacks your purchased goods into a small bundle: dried meat, powder, a roll of sinew, and a pair of thick socks you didn't intend to buy, but knew you needed the moment you saw them. As he ties the bundle, the door creaks open, and another blast of cold slips inside. A tall man enters, stomping snow from his boots. His coat is torn near the shoulder, and frost clings to the fur of his hood. He nods at the trader, then sets his pack near the counter with a heavy thud. For a moment, the room fills with the faintest hum of shared presence. No words, just the heavy breathing of men arriving from long distances, shaking frost from their sleeves, stepping into the tiny, fragile margin of warmth offered by the trading post walls. The fire crackles softly. Someone shifts their boots. Coins clink faintly. The world beyond the door howls quietly, muffled by timber and thick pelts nailed along the interior beams. You finish your drink, gather your supplies, and pull your gloves back on. The trader nods once in farewell. The trapper by the fire lifts a hand without looking up. When you push open the door again, the cold rushes back, clean, sharp, unquestioning. The sky hangs low over the landscape, the snow deep, the air still. Behind you, the light of the trading post flickers against the frost, shrinking as you walk away until it becomes no more than a faint, trembling glow swallowed by the wilderness. You adjust your pack, settle your shoulders beneath its weight, and follow the pale stretch of snow leading back into the quiet that waits for you on the far side of the trees. The warmth fades quickly, but for a brief moment you carried it with you. You push open the cabin door, and the cold meets you like a held breath finally released. Clean, immediate, and patient. The little warmth you carried from the trading post slips away the instant the logs part, drawn out into the hollow like smoke. Inside, the light is thin and the embers you left the night before have settled into a tired, grey bed. The pelts you hung to thaw hang limp and still, beads of frost glinting along the seams where damp meets cold. For a moment you stand in the doorway, shoulders braced against the wind that slips in through the poorly fitted boards, feeling the exact shape of the shelter's limits. You set your pack down carefully, the leather sighing as the weight meets the packed snow beneath it. The coins and little goods the trader handed you feel foreign in your palm, small bright things that belong to rooms with steady fires and soft beds. Here, they are just objects to be counted and carried, tokens you tuck away with the same routine you use to fold a blanket. Efficient, necessary, not sentimental. The cabin smells of damp wool and old smoke. That smell settles into your bones more thoroughly than any warmth. It announces that the place remembers heat, if only in memory. You pull the pelts closer to the hearth, setting them so the faintest of the ember heat kisses their fur. They release a soft rasp as the frozen fibres relax, and tiny droplets bead and steam where the fur meets warmer air. You touch one briefly, a fox, still soft despite the cold, and the sensation of the pelt under your fingertips is both business and small consolation. Outside, the wind gathers itself around the eaves, finding every seam and seam. It has a voice tonight, deep and patient as if the earth itself speaks, and the trees relay its sentences by creaking and sighing. The sound presses into the cabin in thin waves. Every gust tests the joints of your shelter, nudging at the lids of your trunk, rattling the pot that hangs above the hearth. You move with the cautious, practiced gestures of someone who's learned to live in the pause between gusts, closing the door with a small, measured shove, wedging a scrap of wood into a gap where the cold finds its easiest path. You stir the embers. They take reluctantly, brightening in a small, stubborn flare that warms only the near air. The smoke climbs through the hole you left in the roof and disperses into night, carrying a smell that tastes of the trading post and of the road. Pine tar on your gloves, the last thin ribbon of tobacco clinging to your kerchief. The warmth isn't generous. It reaches your hands and the centre of your chest, and no further. It is enough to thaw fingertips so they can do precise work. You set about small repairs. The cold teaches you to value small fixes. A bit of sinew drawn through a loose seam, a wedge jammed into a loose board, a smear of fat rubbed into a cracked mitten. Each repair is a conversation with your tools, the needle, the awl, the knife, and you speak with them without words, hands understanding what thoughts might take too long to say. Time moves slowly when your fingers are busy. The stitch, the knot, the cut. The cabin creaks in reply, approving or disapproving, indifferent as the land. As you work, you listen. The wind's voice runs through the chest of the walls in waves, lowering and rising like a tide. At times it seems to say a name you can't remember, or perhaps it only shapes the syllables your mind almost makes. Snow slides from a high branch with a dry hiss and lands in a soft, muffled pile against the opposite wall. You pause, feeling the rhythm of the place settle around whatever you're doing. An old clock that ticks with the snow's weight. Night deepens, you prepare a thin broth, the meat gelatinous from the long freeze, and eat it over the hearth with the held patience winter requires. Each spoonful warms the inside of your mouth and dulls a little of the gnawing that hunger brings. You think of the trader's prices and the small stack of coins in your pouch. You think of the next line of traps you must check. The long walk north where the snow lies undisturbed and waiting. These are the measures of your life here. Steps, traps, pelt, coin. You hang the heavier pelts on a beam, the weight forcing the wood to bow faintly. They fill the cabin with a subdued presence, a reminder of nights and days spent negotiating with silence and animal movement. The beaver's dense pelt hangs near the door, so its breath will meet any cold air first, a small barrier against the worst. You set a clean strip of hide beneath where you will sleep. Its rough tanned surface will make the hard ground feel less like a rock and more like an ally. Outside, the wind does not soften. Instead, it learns the cabin's quirks and presses harder where there are weaknesses. A loose post, a widening crack, a place where frost forms a fintail and drops jagged shards across the steps. You listen to its study like a scholar, noting the places you must watch tomorrow. The shelter that kept you alive yesterday will not necessarily hold you tomorrow. You tend it not because you fear its collapse, but because you understand how little it takes for cold to change a day into a reckoning. You set a sled of small items beside the door, a bucket, a spare strap, the flint you sharpened at the trading post. Preparation calms you. It is a kind of prayer without ceremony, to know where each tool rests, to be able to reach for rope in the dark without thinking too long. In this place, thought must be swift, or it will be stolen by the cold. When you finally lie down, you make a small ritual of arranging your wraps. Layers fold into layers until your body nests in a kind of ordered suffocation. The blanket holds the scent of wood smoke and the tang of animal oil. It is a familiar mattress and a memory. Even here, before sleep, you cannot help but check the door, the beam holding the smoke hole, the tautness of the cord sealing the small window. You make the cabin safe by doing the small things, again and again, until action calms the mind. The wind learns to wait at the door in a way you have learned to accept. It tugs, it tests, it sighs, but the logs answer with the same slow stubbornness you carry in your bones. The cold does not bargain. It only attempts patiently to move past the thin defences you have built. You fold yourself into this truth, and sleep comes as a slow dimming. But sleep here is not like it once was. It arrives in fragments, soft slips between wakefulness. You find yourself awake at odd hours, eyes open to the pale seam of the doorway, listening as the wind draws patterns in the night. Sometimes you imagine you can hear far-off voices carried along the gusts, a laugh, a lament, a market cry. They are echoes, shaped by distance and imagination, and you hold on to them the way a man clutches coin in a cold pocket. When the night leans toward the small hours, a gust presses harder, sliding under the threshold and riffling the pelts. You sit up, feeling the chill like a hand on your shoulder. You refill the embers then, coaxing them to life until a small halo of warmth circles your hands. You breathe in the smoke and feel a strange gratitude, not for comfort, which is rare, but for the knowledge that you have once more kept the wind at bay. You watch the fire with quiet attention until the flame settles into a slow glow once again. Your eyelids grow heavy. The wind continues to test the walls, patient and watchful. It waits at the cabin's edge as a faithful thing waits at a gate, knowing that if it is gentle and constant enough, it will find a way in. You have learned, however, to make your gates narrow and to hold them with your work and routine. Before sleep fully takes you, you run your thumb over the coins in your palm, small cold metal that ties this place to the distant rooms where furs are warmed into collars and comfort. You feel neither pride nor shame, only the steady recognition that each piece is a quiet ledger entry in a life measured by enduring. The wind answers from the logs, and you let its voice lull you until your thoughts thin into the blankness that comes before dawn. Out there, the night keeps its vigil. Inside, you keep yours. The shelter remembers heat, and the wind remembers its patience. You are caught between both, and you hold your small place tightly, tucking warmth into the pockets of a winter that does not intend to leave. You wake before the light has fully decided to be day, as you always do now. Not because an alarm calls you, but because your body has folded the forest into its own schedule. Your breath rises in slow clouds, the same pale punctuation you leave on the air every morning, and you move without hurry toward where the tools sit by the hearth. The cabin answers your motion as if it were a living thing, a familiar creak here, the faint sigh of logs settling there. Nothing startles you anymore. Even the smallest noises belong to the place, and you to them. Outside, the world is shaped in known measures. You can tell time by the way the light slips through the pines, by which branches hold their snow like a blanket, and which have already shed theirs. Your feet have learned the hidden traps in the snow, the thin crust that gives way a few steps in, the shallow hollows that pull wind and hide ice beneath. You step so often in the same places that the land reads like a hand you know by touch. Where once each sound made you look up, now you listen differently. Not because you fear, but because you learn. The first weeks were a series of surprises and reckonings. The way cold eats at leather, the sudden betrayal of a path under new drift, the small cruelties of frost on exposed skin. Now the season's lessons have been absorbed. You pace yourself naturally, your breathing in tune with the long, slow pulse of winter. Your muscles remember how to lift logs with minimal waste of strength. Your joints have adjusted to the daily small shocks of cold. Even hunger has a timetable. You know how long broth will last and when the stored meat will be tender enough to provide the energy you need. The forest takes its measure of you too. At first it kept an easy, indifferent distance, trees that watched without choosing to be friendly or hostile. Over time, the woods have begun to settle into a quieter recognition. Tracks you left weeks ago are now trodden down into faint grooves that help guide your way. Small cairns and notches you carved into birch bark stand as marks that mean more to you than to anyone else. Animals adjust their routes around your more travelled lines. Foxes cross at the ridge instead of the hollow. Martens avoid the old set of traps, as if they have learned the presence of your snares. The land suggests patterns to you, and you accept them like advice. You have rituals that fit the place. Mornings are for checking traps and sharpening knives, while the light is still thin. Midday, you mend what winter has worn. Stitch leather, weave new lashings from sinew, smear fat carefully into seams to slow the bite of cold. Evenings are for the slow building of the fire and the turning of pelts, letting the warmth coax out the last of the freezer's hold before hanging them to dry. These are not chores exactly. They are the small vows you make to continue existing here. They ground you. They shape the days into something almost human. When you walk, you move with an economy that surprises you. Where you once might have taken long sightseeing strides through the white, you now find the shortest line between tasks, the path that saves your energy and respects the land's moods. Snowshoes are tightened differently, depending on whether you cross a hollow or a ridge. Knots you tie have become personal, quick to release when needed, impossible to loosen by accident. Fingers that once trembled when snow clung to them now work with a precision that comes from repetition and necessity. Your knife is an extension of your hand. Your eye measures timber the same way it measures a face. Sleep has changed its shape. You do not sink into it as those in towns might. Instead, sleep arrives like a tide. Shallow, then deeper, then shallow again. Each cycle broken by the tiny attentions of a man who lives by his senses. You wake to sound now with an intimacy that borders on reverence, the way ice will pop in a certain pattern before a thaw, the whispering creak of pines when wind shifts, the flash of wings near the clearing that means a bird has changed course. These are not disruptions, but small conversations you are finally fluent in. There is a humility that grows from this acceptance. You learn to read not just tracks, but moods, the way the sky tightens before a crust forms, the manner in which crows gather when food is scarce, the softening of snow that signals a brief mercy from the cold. You learn to plan around these small mercies, when to set extra traps near the creek, when to avoid a slope that will avalanche at a certain thaw, when to chance a night near a river's edge because steam rising from it keeps frost at bay. In all these choices you discover a quieter sort of wisdom, not the mastery of the land, but a habit of listening to its limits. The cabin itself begins to adapt with you. You cut shorter lengths of wood for the door jamb, so it shuts more snugly. You reposition a shelf so the pelts hang, where the smoke will reach them, but not so close that they refreeze when the fire dies. You learn which cracks will let out smoke, and which will let in wind, and you seal the worst of them with a mixture of mud and moss until it hardens like a new skin on the logs. These are small engineering feats, born of the simple truth that a shelter is only as good as the thought spent on its seams. People, when they come, notice the changes. The trader at the outpost gives you a nod that tastes like respect the first time he sees you with a full sled instead of just a dried pelt. The occasional trapper who passes through pauses longer at your fire, more willing now to trade a story or some spare supplies. You find the currency of companionship is small and practical. A strip of cured meat, a patch of leather, an extra length of cord. Conversation comes in short breaths, half sentences kept brief by scarf and cold, but there is comfort in the shared understanding that both of you keep the world's machinery moving, one careful hand at a time. Still, the trade-offs of this life become clearer the longer you remain. Your hands know the work of making warmth for others more intimately than they know the art of warmth for yourself. You count pelts the way others count days, and each one is a calculation, which will bring food, which will buy a repair, which will be bartered for something that might make the next season kinder. The irony is quiet and sharp. Your labour produces comfort for rooms you will not see, warmth for collars and linings that will sit against strangers' necks, while your own fingers remain stained with smoke. There are days when the sameness presses until it aches. The white horizon can feel like a long, patient stare, but those ache days are soothed by the small differences the land offers. An unexpected set of tracks that divert your route, the sight of a lone hawk circling against the pale sky, the sudden taste of coffee at a trading post that hasn't yet closed for winter. You notice them and tuck them away, storing small comforts in the same way you pile kindling, carefully and for a future you cannot predict. Over weeks, your relationship with the forest loses the raw edges of fear and becomes instead an economy of familiarity and mutual tolerance. The trees accept your presence as a temporary arrangement, and you accept the forest's indifference as its most honest fact. This is not peace exactly. It is a kind of companionable truce. You give the land the respect it demands, and in exchange, it gives you tasks you can complete, boundaries you can understand, rhythms you can match. On a late afternoon when the sky begins to pale, you walk the line of newly reset traps, checking the knots you tied that morning, smoothing the snow back over each mechanism to keep it honest against spurious winds. In the pocket of your coat, you carry a scrap of cloth wrapped around a small coin, payment from the trader, saved for a need you haven't yet named. You feel the coin with a privilege that has nothing to do with wealth. It is a small proof that the world still acknowledges the trade it gets from you. You pause at the ridge and look out. The forest rolls like a soft, endless sea. The wind moves through it with that old patient voice, but now it feels like a neighbour passing through rather than a challenger. You breathe in and find the air reveals less bite than it once did, as though your chest has thickened with a new tolerance. The land has learned you, your scents, your roots, your rhythms, and you have learned it in return. The exchange is quiet, almost invisible, but it steadies you in ways no coin ever will. Turning back toward the shelter, you carry that steadiness like a tool. It will be useful tonight when the wind learns to push harder, and useful again tomorrow when dawn asks you to step into the white and do the small work that keeps life threaded through this season that never truly ends. The light fades early again, slipping away before you feel you've earned its company. Long shadows stretch across the snow as you return to the cabin, carrying what the day has given you. By the time you step inside, the cold has already found the spaces you left behind, settling against the walls as though it never once retreated. You set down your pack with a soft thud, the weight of it pulling at your shoulders even after you let go. The pelts need tending before anything else. They lie across the small workbench, stiff at the edges where frost has crept back in, pliable only near the centre. You unroll them one by one, your breath rising in slow plumes as you inspect each piece under the wavering glow of the fire. The fur catches the light in muted tones, brown, rust, grey, almost black, soft murmurs of animals whose movements once shaped the very spaces you now walk. Your hands begin the work automatically. They know the motions better than your mind does. You stretch the pelts gently, thumbs pressing along the grain, checking for weak seams or hidden tears that must be mended before they can be sold. The cold has numbed your fingers enough that you rely more on the memory of touch than the sensation of it. Your hands slide along the pelts with a reverence born from necessity. The fox feels lightest, its fur delicate beneath your palms. A creature built for silence and quick turns, now reduced to a shape that warms your fingertips only faintly. You smooth it carefully, noticing how the coat still holds a faint smell of pine from where it once ran. You fold it with care, tucking it into the pack's inner pocket, where it will stay safe from damp. The beaver comes next, heavier and dense, its fur thick with the life it once used to brave frozen waters. It resists you slightly as you stretch it across the table, the hide still stiff in places the fire hasn't reached. You rub your hands across it to soften it, feeling the warmth return in small pulses as your blood stirs. Its weight serves as a reminder that survival in this land belongs to those who can build, swim, endure. You lift it slowly and place it to the side. Then the marten, the fisher, the hare, each one a quiet lesson in the strange arithmetic of winter. You handle them gently, arranging them according to size and quality, the way any trader would expect. The cabin grows warm enough now to erase the frost forming at the edges of your sleeves, but not enough to soften the stiffness in your joints. You pause only to add a small piece of wood to the fire. The flames respond with a low crackle, sending a thin wave of warmth rolling toward your knees. It's a fragile heat, one that warms the surface of your skin but never sinks deep enough to stay there. Still, it makes the work easier, the room brighter, the silence more bearable. When you return to the table, the pelts have relaxed slightly in the warmth, their edges softer, their colours less muted. You bind them tightly with cord, creating bundles that can be carried without damage. Your hands shake slightly as you pull the knots tight, not from fear, not from cold alone, but from the long hours of steady work that winter requires. You adjust the knots until they sit clean and secure. As you tie the last bundle, you sit back and rest your palms against your thighs, letting the fire's glow wash over your face. The weight of the bundles sits beside you, small in size but heavy with meaning. Each one holds a story made from quiet labour. Your long walks through frozen ridges, your fingers stiff with frost as you reset traps. The nights you spent warming tools that had grown too brittle to use. You lift one of the bundles onto your lap. It feels warm now, or warmer than most things in the cabin. The fur nestles into the skin of your wrists, its softness a cruel contrast to the cold seeping through the cabin walls. You trace its surface slowly, knowing that somewhere, months from now, this same piece will drape across the shoulders of someone who has never stepped foot into woods like these, someone whose fires burn bright enough to chase cold from every corner of their home. It's a strange sort of exchange, your life turned into warmth for strangers, their comfort purchased with your stillness, your silence, your long walks across landscapes that never forgive carelessness. You picture rooms filled with soft lamplight and steady laughter, halls warmed by brick hearths, polished floors where boots never meet snow unless someone carries it in on purpose. Those rooms feel like stories from a different world, a world you pass by only in thought. The pelts on your lap don't know any of that. They are simply the final shape of the work you've done, the quiet harvest of a season that asks for more than it ever returns. You don't resent it. Winter has no interest in fairness. You set the bundle aside gently and begin sorting through your supplies. Twine, scrap cloth, a small tin of fat for waterproofing. The routine is grounding. These are the tasks that build the quiet structure of your days, tightening straps, testing buckles, reinforcing seams. You work with calm focus, letting the fire's flicker guide your movements. Outside, the wind shifts again. It brushes against the cabin's outer wall in long, dragging sighs, scouting for loose boards and warm air to steal. You listen to it idly as you work. Its voice has become familiar, less threatening, though no less persistent. You match its rhythm without thinking, your breath rising and falling with the gusts, as if the cold outside has a hand on your shoulder. When the bundles are ready, you stack them neatly on a shelf, near the door. Their presence adds weight to the room, not physically, but in the way they mark the passing of time. Each one is a reminder of how much the season has claimed, how much it has given, and how much it has demanded in return. You stand for a long moment, staring at them as the fire settles into a low, pulsing glow. Your hands ache, not sharply, but with a slow, settling fatigue that feels older than you are. You rub warmth back into your fingers, then sit near the fire with your back to the wall. The pelts sit in your peripheral vision, small bundles of survival wrapped in fur. You imagine the journey ahead, carrying these bundles to the nearest post, trading them for coins that will buy tools, salt, powder, or the small pieces of comfort necessary to endure another stretch of endless cold. You picture the trader's careful hands lifting each pelt, appraising the work, weighing it. You picture the distant path your labour will travel long after you've returned to the cabin and started again. Your eyelids grow heavy as the wind murmurs outside. The fire shifts, sending a faint warmth across your legs. You listen to the quiet inside the cabin, to the small settling sounds that accompany the approach of night. You think of the forest and the way it shapes your days, how its pace has become your own, how its stories are carried in the pelts you now store, how each life taken becomes part of this strange, cold exchange. You gather the last small pelt from the table, a hair, light enough to lift with one hand, and turn it over slowly. Its softness surprises you every time. It's the kind of warmth that feels fleeting, the kind that travels quickly from your fingers before disappearing into the cold again. You fold it carefully, knowing it will bring comfort to someone who may never know the cost of its gentleness. You place it with the others and let your hands rest on the table. The season's work is beginning to take shape. It is not finished, not even close, but pieces of it lie bundled before you, quiet, tangible, waiting. The fire crackles once, then settles back into a slow whisper. The wind brushes the door, testing the edges, searching for a way inside. You breathe deeply, letting the warmth of the room settle against your tired body. The pelts sleep in neat bundles. The cold waits just beyond the walls. And you sit between them, held by the knowledge that your hardship will warm a world you will never touch. The fire dims again as the night grows older, leaving only a faint red glow against the cabin walls. You watch the embers for a while, not out of worry that they'll fade, but because you've come to understand that watching fire is its own kind of rest. The bundles of pelts sit neatly by the door, their presence steady and quiet, almost like company. Outside, the wind hums low against the eaves, slipping between boards and sighing through each gap in the logs, as though testing your resolve. You pull another wrap over your shoulders before stepping outside. The cold greets you instantly, no gentler than it ever is. It presses into the weave of your coat, tucks itself into the cuffs of your sleeves, finds the thin seams along your gloves. The moon hangs low and pale above the tree line, faint behind a wash of drifting cloud. The snow underfoot seems to glow with its borrowed light, each ridge and drift shaped into soft curves by the long breath of night. Your breath floats ahead of you like a fragile lantern as you take your first steps away from the cabin. The packed snow near the doorway yields easily. Farther out, it deepens again, reclaiming its untouched stillness. As you walk, you hear the familiar, muffled crunch beneath your boots, a sound that rarely changes, no matter how many weeks stack themselves into the season. There are no landmarks out here, not really. The forest repeats itself in infinite variations. This pine taller than the one beside it, this drift shaped differently by wind, this ridge slightly steeper than the last. Yet your body knows the patterns well. Your feet turn where they should, your hands rest where the path steadies, your eyes travel along the faint lines of the land without needing to be told where to look. The cold feels heavier tonight, sinking deeper into your coat, trying to wrap itself around your ribs. You adjust your scarf and continue onward, keeping your movements slow and deliberate. The air tastes clean. Sharp, metallic, but clean. Winter may never feel welcoming, but it never lies. The forest stands in its familiar hush, a stillness that is never absolute, but layered, a faint shift of branches high above, the distant crackle of frost forming on a dead limb, the soft groan of ice beneath some buried creek. These sounds carry no urgency, no threat. They are the land breathing around you, the season settling into itself the way it always does. You move through it with a quiet acceptance. There was a time when you might have questioned your pace, your direction, your purpose. Now the questions have been worn down by repetition, replaced by something steadier, something simpler. You walk because walking feels natural, because the land demands distance and the season demands endurance. You walk because stopping would make the cabin feel too small, and staying still too long would let the cold learn you too deeply. The trees thin as you reach the higher ridges. From here, the land stretches outward in soft undulations, rising and falling in long breaths beneath the snow. The moonlight makes everything appear both close and impossibly far, the kind of landscape that swallows sound, thought, and time in equal measure. You pause for a moment, resting your hands on your thighs, feeling the weight of your breath move slowly in and out of your chest. There's no rush to your steps. There never is. Speed has no place in a winter like this. You move with the measured calm of someone who has learned that the world will not shift for your urgency. Your footsteps form a narrow path behind you, a thin trail that the wind will erase within hours. The impermanence of it all brings a strange peace. Nothing you leave lasts long. Not tracks, not warmth, not the shape of your presence. The land keeps itself clean. The sky above you deepens into a muted blue as the clouds drift apart. Far overhead, stars appear in small clusters, dimmed by distance and cold, but no less steady. They scatter across the sky in patterns too old to read, marking a time that has nothing to do with seasons or traps or men walking through snow. You stand for a moment, tilting your chin upward, letting the faint starlight rest on your face. Your breath fogs the air again, curling and vanishing quickly. The cold steals it faster at this elevation, pulling the warmth from even the deepest exhale. You pull your coat tighter and begin walking again, tracing a gentle curve in the land that leads toward another set of ridges. Your knees ache with the cold, the joints stiffening, but you move through it the way you move through everything out here, slowly, steadily, without argument. There is a kind of comfort in the predictability. You know the way the snow behaves on different slopes, the places where wind gathers into sharp gusts, the hollows where cold pools like water in a forgotten basin. You know which trees hold their branches low enough to brush your hood as you pass. The land has learned to expect you, and you have learned to understand its moods. Sometimes, as tonight, the familiarity feels almost like companionship. You reach a ridge where the snow lies smoother, untouched by the usual scatter of small tracks. The silence deepens here, settling over the land like a thick blanket. You pause, turning your head to listen. Nothing moves, not a bird, not a branch, not even the distant rustle of some hidden creature making its way beneath the snow. It's the kind of quiet that feels ancient, as though it existed long before your footsteps disturbed it and will return long after your path is swallowed. You continue walking, each step carrying you through the long stretch of land that never seems to change. Yet change is there, only too slow to notice unless you live inside it long enough. The light shifts slightly. The air deepens in temperature. The shadows soften. The trees arrange themselves in new ways as you pass. Even the cold, tireless as it is, holds different shapes at different hours. Your breath grows heavier, your shoulders settling into the weariness of the walk. You adjust your pack, though it holds little weight now. Mostly your tools, some scrap food, a coil of rope. The pelts rest back in the cabin, bundled neatly, waiting for the next journey to the trading post. Tonight, the load on your back comes from the season itself, a kind of invisible weight that settles across every limb, every thought, every slow step forward. The snow stills as you descend the ridge. The wind softens until it becomes only a faint pressure against your back. The trees gather close again, their trunks dark pillars rising from the white ground. You recognize these shapes. You've walked this way enough times that your body moves without needing to think, guided by memory more than sight. You reach the edge of a familiar hollow. The snow lies deep here, but the land remembers your steps, and your steps remember the land. You cross slowly, feeling the surface shift beneath you, testing each step with the instinct that long winters carve into anyone who survives them. At the far side of the hollow, you stop and turn. The landscape stretches behind you, a long ribbon of footprints fading into the dusk. The sky above it glows faintly, where the moonlight touches the drifting clouds. You stand there in the quiet, breathing slowly, letting the cold settle around you like an old coat. There is no destination pressing you forward, no urgent task waiting at the end of your path. But the stillness of the forest never holds you for long. It welcomes you only in passing, and so you walk, not because the land grows easier, not because the season softens, not because you expect the snow to melt or the cold to ease its grip. You walk because that is what life here becomes, movement through a landscape that teaches endurance by offering none of its own. You walk because stillness feels like surrender, and surrender is not something the winter will ever reward. You walk because the rhythm of your steps has become part of the forest's own pulse. The night deepens, the wind shifts again, the snow accepts each new step without protest. The winter does not end, but you continue anyway, a small figure moving across a vast, indifferent land, steady in your pace, patient in your silence, carrying a life measured not in warmth, but in the simple, quiet act of going forward. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten corner of history you'd like explored next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks for the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S., Rich Davis, and Leslie Schofield. Sleep well.